wizards, warlocks, and warriors. Welcome to Multiverse. So last time we talked a bit about D&D, Diablo 2, and Baldur's Gate. So once I was done with Baldur's Gate, I had to find more games. More games! So I got Icewind Dale. Again, like Baldur's Gate, it is using the advanced Dungeon and Dragon rules. Although they had an option where you could add some 3rd edition rules to the game, so you could make the game into a hybrid of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons and 3rd edition if you wanted to. Icewind Dale was pretty much a dungeon crawl with a lot of combat. It was a bit more linear than Baldur's Gate, but you could still explore a bit if you wanted to. Also, one of the big difference with Baldur's Gate is that in Baldur's Gate you create your one character and then you recruit NPCs in the world to form your party. Here you create the entire party at the start of the game, so all the characters in your party are characters that you created. You can also play in multiplayer, but again you end up with the trouble of trying to find a group of players that can get together to play the game. Once in a while we would have LAN parties, but games like Baldur's Gate and Icewind Dale were way too big. There's no way we could complete the game during one LAN party. So during LAN party we would pretty much play games that were less time consuming, like games like Warcraft for example. And then of course, once I was done with Icewind Dale, I needed more games. So I started playing Planescape Torment. Technically, Planescape Torment was released at the same time as Baldur's Gate, I think, or around the same time. But I started playing a bit later than that. So by the time I started playing computer games, Baldur's Gate 2 were already released. The same with Icewind Dale, and the same with Torment. So I started with those, and then later on I got, I think, the expansion for Icewind Dale. So I replayed Icewind Dale with the expansion, and then afterwards we got the expansion Throne of Baal for Baldur's Gate 2. So I got a lot of epic games in a very short amount of time, which make it almost torture afterwards when we would have to wait months and months to get a new game. I didn't really know anything about Planescape Torment. I knew it was one of the settings of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, but that's pretty much all I knew about. So in Planescape Torment, you pretty much start as a dead guy. You wake up in the mortuary, you don't remember anything of your life before, and you pretty much have to explore the world and gain items and basically try to remember who you are. The story was pretty awesome, but even more than just the story, the atmosphere, the music, everything was a great experience. Also, there were some sad parts, like basically you meet an NPC that used to be your lady, and holy crap, the dialogues with that NPC were, let's say, very touching. And you have some great NPCs in Torment that you can recruit in your party. You have Valor, the evil fallen paladin. You have Ignis, the evil pyromancer. You have Morte, which is basically a floating skull that acts as a fighter. And you have a rich world that you can explore with your party. It was pretty awesome. And the end cinematic. Again, you had such a great experience, such a great atmosphere within the game, that when you reach the end and you see the end cinematic, it was a great moment. And after I was done playing Torment, we got another game that was called Neverwinter Nights. Foolishly, we thought that it would be basically Baldur's Gate, but with a 3D engine. Sadly, we were very mistaken. From what I understand, it's a different group of developer that made Neverwinter Nights than Baldur's Gate, even though it was made technically by the same company. But one of the first thing they did, they pretty much threw away everything about Baldur's Gate. And sadly, that is something that happens way too often, is that they always keep on reinventing the wheels. Developers or creators very often want to reinvent everything. So instead of taking the Baldur's Gate formula, instead of keeping everything that was good about Baldur's Gate and just updating it with a 3D engine, sadly they decided to throw everything away. It's something sadly that I've seen too often, where the new team comes in, they look at what the old team did, they think that everything sucks, we can do better than that, and they throw everything away, redo everything from scratch, and then realize that maybe they were not able to do that. So they pretty much had a winning formula with Baldur's Gate, and instead of continuing that but trying to just improve the graphics, instead they decided to throw everything away and they decided to try to copy something that was more popular. So instead of telling themselves, okay, we have Baldur's Gate, it was a success, they looked at something that was a bit more of a success, or at least they thought was a bit more of a success, like Diablo 2, and they decided to implement the features from Diablo 2 in Neverwinter Nights. Although instead of having, let's say, scrolls to be able to teleport back into town, they had this magic rock that would do the same. Also, instead of creating a whole party like you did in Baldur's Gate, you would have just the one NPC that would follow you around. Again, not unlike Diablo 2. So sadly, they did the mistake we often see, that they saw a game that was popular and they tried to add feature from that game into their game, and it wasn't a very good idea. Also, apparently at first, Neverwinter Nights was only supposed to be a tool set to allow people to create modules for other people to play. And when those rumors first started, there was almost a revolt. People were not very happy about that. A lot of people did not really want to buy a tool set; they wanted to buy a game. So supposedly the devs created a whole campaign at the very last minute, and it kind of showed. Let's say it wasn't the most inspiring campaign. The game was still kind of fun, but the sad part is that the best part of the game was character creation. They did a really good job reproducing the 3rd edition character creation of Dungeons and Dragons. So you could really customize your character. No more did you have to choose between being a fighter or a thief or a mage. You could literally take like one level of fighter, one level of mage, one level of cleric, one level of... and then you could assign points and feats anywhere you wanted. So you could create a sneaky rogue that hides in shadow and backstab with his dagger. Or you could create what I labeled the super rogue, who would be basically almost a fighter that would dual wield bastard swords. We'll have to make a video about that at some point. So technically Neverwinter Nights was tools for people to make modules, and people started making modules. Sadly, making modules took a lot of time. So what people ended up doing is that they had to make modules, but in very short increment. Basically, they would make a module that would last, that would take you 2, 3, 6 hours to play, because it was pretty, even with a tool set, it was pretty time consuming to make a whole module. And you had to make the module, write the dialogues, then you probably had to do at least a little bit of testing. Although in some cases you could tell that they didn't do a lot of testing because sometimes it was a bit wacky. And of course also balancing the whole thing. Sadly, a lot of players who made those modules were not very good at making it a balanced experience. So sometimes you would either have a module where the monsters were way too hard to defeat, where the fights were pretty much impossible to win, or you would make modules where your character was in god mode and you would pretty much just slay everything with just one look. And at some point there was a lot of modules, so it was kind of hard to try to sort through that mess and try to find the good modules and try to ignore those that were not so good. So in theory, making a toolset that would allow players to make modules might have seemed like a good idea. It might have seemed like something that would allow people to be able to get basically unlimited content to play, because there would be a lot of people creating that content. But in the end, I don't think it did work too well. Again, you had a lot of modules that are not very good to play, so I don't think the idea of allowing players to create modules was a very good idea. But I might be alone in that. There did seem to be a community that did seem to enjoy that, so maybe it's just me that did not enjoy that. Although I did play Neverwinter Nights a couple of times. I tried it with a couple of different classes. I even played it twice with a rogue. At first I created my classic rogue with my classic rogue mage. And basically I created a rogue, gave him one level of mage, and that was my rogue mage that I played in the other games. Or at some point, as I mentioned before, I created the super rogue. Basically the rogue that would dual wield bastard swords, that would be wearing chainmail armor. I have to admit, that was a pretty fun bit. Sadly, I got a lot of great games into a short amount of time. I was a bit late in starting to play computer games, so when I started playing, there was already Baldur's Gate 2, Icewind Dale, Torment that were out, Fallout 1 and 2. But then once I was done with those games, then I had to do like everyone else. I had to wait for the next game. It was a bit of a torture, waiting and waiting for the next fix. And then finally, at some point, we got a great game called Arcana. But that will be a story for our next video.